There are periods in my life where I realize that I've become convinced of some new angle on reality. It's unconscious. No one has made an argument that I've had to mull over, but my gut has clearly come to some conclusion that changes everything. And now nothing seems to matter anymore. I've been evaluating the world incorrectly, and nothing can measure up to this new, shadowy metric. Something has seeped in from below the surface and reoriented everything, and I don't even know what it is. Pathologic 2 introduced this kind of unsettling, creeping agitation into my value system. I used to dread it, honestly, even while I couldn't get enough of it. For a while, all I could say about the game was, it's oppressive, it's severe, it's heavy. The atmosphere is stifling and subdues the normal excitement of playing a game. The ideas and language of the text made me feel small and stupid. But none of that is the reason my relationship with the game was surrounded by this dense emotional haze. These pieces are necessary for facilitating the real source of the turmoil that had wormed itself into my soul and weighed it down. And after years of retracing my steps, I've come to realize that Mark Immortel and his play were the culprit. When I say that I have spent weeks of my life in a muted, deadened haze over this one element of the game, I'm really not exaggerating. I had to process the feelings it created in me. This through line that almost seems like a subplot in the grand scheme of the game challenged beliefs I took for granted and broke assumptions I had made about what Pathologic 2 was trying to tell me. I got through the cruelty and helplessness of the game, but the suggestion that Artemi Burakh isn't real, which is a literal truth about the world I live in, hurt me. I like stories because I like characters, and I loved Pathologic 2 because I really love Artemi. I love when a story can bring me into a new reality to animate characters that cannot exist outside the context of their story worlds. Characters can teach us new ways of thinking because of the way they relate to their own worlds. The way they understand their realities is what allows us to understand them. And the way their worlds mold them is what allows us to understand those worlds. If you unravel a human being, if you tug on each and every connected thread that creates the bounded structure of a person, you will inevitably be left with a bird's eye view of everything. If you're a human being, you are a piece of origami folded out of space-time. And if I try to understand you, how you identify, what you believe, what you care about, I will tug on millennia of context and will inevitably be left with the entire universe. That is exactly how a character existing in a story world can be understood. And it feels just as numinous, at least to me. I can understand Hamlet as a tragic, anemic, well-meaning but utterly useless agent in his own life if I allow myself to understand his world. A world where even the dead can exert more agency by sheer force of hatred, while humans with good intentions can't seem to make anything good happen. Hamlet will not listen to his own conscience because his father will continue to steer him toward blood. And in a world where ghosts exist, the fear of not living up to this embodied idea of what he is supposed to want is far greater than it can be in our world. But, for Artemi, the chance to understand him is relentlessly taken away or changed on a dime. Even within his story, fictional characters are acting like he doesn't exist. There was something so overwhelmingly tragic about that. Every time I let him die and spoke to Mark, I had to pick one of two choices. I could pretend to be Artemi and completely strip his story of any relevance because he isn't vulnerable to that world, or I have to cop to the fact that I'm pretending to be a plague doctor for fun, and that this entity called Artemi Burakh is just my proxy agent in this game, which kinda sucks all the meaning out of the role, Mark. Either way, my conversations with Mark either suggest a potential Artemi without the context of his story, or Artemi's story without Artemi, without a real person learning and struggling and trying to survive. Just my dumbass ruining everything over and over again. Despite loving the game, I realized that I had forced myself to enjoy it in a very narrow way. The point of the play Mark is directing is to string many Artemis together, to create an entity that overcomes death because it isn't bound by a physical body with cells and matter and such. That's why the fiction of the play requires each run to denote a new actor, who really dies in the reality of the play. Cutting and binding characters stitches together a kind of immortality, a lateral immortality, if not a longitudinal one. If every single playthrough or potential playthrough of the game results in a distinct Artemi Burach, what does it mean for one version to be authentic? For an actor to become him? What does it mean to make the right choice for this character? There are infinite ways to refract Artemi Burach. Some potential playthroughs of the game can paint the picture of a spiteful, indignant, petulant person who can always find some reason to be offended or angry. I don't like that guy. The Artemi I like has a sharp and sometimes prickly sense of humor, but he's more often self-deprecating and easygoing when he's insulted. He may not know who he is in terms of what kind of role he should occupy, but other than that, he's quite self-possessed. He knows his priorities and can't be made self-conscious or defensive by comments that assume the worst of him, because he can simply disregard that which he knows to be untrue. He can be down on himself because he has a far greater capacity for self-reflection than the Bachelor or the Changeling, but he also spends most of his time and energy focused on other people, his friends, his wards, even strangers. But that nice dude that I just described is far from being the only Artemi that exists. Some Artemis can also really hold a grudge, be very quick to violence, and make other people walk on eggshells. The work Mark Immortel is trying to do is to overcome death, and he does that by removing the limitations that make up Artemi Burach. Limitations like those of flesh and blood, of course, but also of character. Why would Artemi be either a doctor or a butcher, an idealist or a humanist, a patient servant or an angry man with a hurt ego, when he could be all of those things and exist throughout them? So long as each of his actors adequately become him in some ephemeral way that Mark himself doesn't seem to understand, Artemi can exist infinitely. But I didn't want that. I realized that I wanted Artemi to be mortal. I wanted him to be a limited and discoverable character that I had to find beneath all of the choices I have to sift through. Artemi himself is a chimera. He's multitudes contained in one, awkwardly fused together by strange, disparate circumstances. If you flood Artemi with too many characters, he drowns. What decisions does the real Artemi make? Any choice is right so long as it's willed, but Artemi's will is grasped at and manipulated by the thousands of people that control him. Where is he in all this? Who the hell is Artemi Burach? I know, these questions sound a bit like asking if the aliens from Annihilation fuck, but I didn't ask these questions because I needed a perfectly logical and simple explanation that justifies the story. I asked because I was trying to find the real question in my heart that I clearly hadn't uncovered yet. I felt weird and uneasy. And then I found that question. And I answered it. To my own satisfaction, anyway. So, I'll ask you what I asked myself. Does Artemi Burach want to be immortal? Artemi has a binary decision to make by the end of the game. To live forever, or to accept that he will die one day. And that's not a personal decision for him. Many, many entities of great power in his universe have a stake in his choice, and they stack the deck pretty high in favor of one answer. The forces attempting to dictate Artemi's life want him to cease being a person, to dissolve in a multitude of Artemis, and therefore live forever. In fact, they do more than want. They count on Artemi making this choice. Artemi's job is to know better than these entities. Because Artemi Burach and his world don't belong in this play. It's not tailored to him. He wasn't made to be infinite. There is a correct, limited character beneath all of his actors, and I'm gonna prove it. But first, a word from, the sponsor. Are you a hominid? Sure you are. But did you know that you can pay me for the privilege of getting to display your status as a hominid on my channel? For just 99 cents a month, you can join my channel at the hominid stage? Is that what it's called? Hominid level. You can join my channel at the hominid level for just 99 cents. And you can get a series of perks. You get to use these lovely loyalty badges that I made. I'm not sure where you get to use them, but they're there for you to use. You get to vote on my next video topics. Also, of course, get a member shout out. I will acknowledge you in the video with a heartfelt thank you. The thank you will be implied. I don't think I'm going to say thank you. Well, I could say thank you every time. That doesn't take that much time. Thank you. Yeah. For just $2.99 a month, you can evolve and become a Homo sapien. Congrats. Homo sapiens get access to all of those other perks that I mentioned, getting a shout out and getting to vote on video topics, and they also get to have early access to my videos, so they'll see it probably about a week before everybody else. And if you're super evolved, you can join for $4.99 a month to be a Homo sapien sapien. That is technically what human beings are, Homo sapien sapiens. But again, you're evolving at a different stage of development through my channel. You're not doing what everyone else has done. We've taken like millions of years to become Homo sapien sapiens. You're gonna do that in like literally a second if you join at the $4.99 tier. I think that's worth paying for to evolve quickly. Soon you won't even have to have a body. You'll just be an amorphous glowing orb. If you become a Homo sapien that quickly. Homo sapien sapiens get to reach out to me and connect with me on social media, probably Discord, that might be the best way. And also, they are entitled to one free screenplay consultation. Doesn't have to be a screenplay, but basically you'll send me a piece of work that you're interested in improving. Could be a video essay, could be a novel, could be a short story, and could be a screenplay, and I will write you a 3,000-word report analyzing your work and giving you suggestions for how to improve it. My strategy as a consultant has not been to arbitrate and do red lines all over people's work. What I'm interested in doing is figuring out people's visions for their pieces and making suggestions for them to best realize those visions, which is the same thing I try to do on this channel. If you've enjoyed any of my criticism and analysis of different kinds of literature and different kinds of stories, you might want me to do that for your pieces. And joining at the $4.99 tier will entitle you to one free version of that in written form. And of course, you can also just pay me directly for that service. I do that for $60 through my own website. I'll link that below. Oh god, I hate doing this. Okay, that's it. There are two things that we need to understand in conjunction with each other to see how radically Artemi diverges from his intended story. Marc Immortel understands himself as a director, but not a playwright. In his understanding, the play being performed by the actors who play Artemi was written by Simon Cain and Isidore Burach, two giants of the town in their own humble opinions, the orchestrators of the town. This play allegedly states that 11 days after Artemi returns home, he tries to ambush a courier delivering the Inquisitor's orders to one General Alexander Bloch, ensuring that he doesn't bombard the polyhedron. It must be said that I can't prove that this is what's in that supposed text. All I know is that the stage directions prescribe that the Haruspex looks for the courier, and that a certain person more intimately involved in the production than I seems to believe that the reason Artemi is looking for the courier is to stop them from delivering the papers. But this particular person doesn't seem all that motivated to stray from the intentions of the play. His name is Isidore Gazar, and his enthusiastic professionalism gives him the brainless idea of taking on the role of Artemi Burach before his predecessor dies. He's not very bright, but he has a kind of orthodox passion for his work that you expect his main skills lie in following precise instructions rather than learning how to come to his own conclusions. And Isidore Gazar seems to believe that the polyhedron needs to be protected, leading to the kin flooding the town and everyone else wandering off into the steppe. But this is incorrect. Isidore Gazar is wrong. Taking the Inquisitor's orders and either burning them or simply holding on to them until 10 p.m. results in the nocturnal ending. The polyhedron is preserved, and the plague kills the remaining townsfolk, allowing the kin to overrun the town and unleashing the miracles and wonders of a depersonalized age of humanity. But Artemi Burach's story properly ends with the diurnal ending. He's supposed to deliver the orders to the general, resulting in the bombardment of the polyhedron, thus generating enough living blood to cure all the survivors of the town. I know this because, well, I know Ice Pick Lodge for one. The hardest ending is the correctest ending, just like in The Void, which is a game I talked about for nearly 3 hours in a previous video. The nocturnal ending is the easier of the two. You either run out the clock after getting your hands on the orders, or walk a few feet to the left and burn the papers with the press of a button. The more difficult ending is to run almost the entire length of the infected and violent town to turn the papers over to the general. That's what a proper Ice Pick Lodge ending entails, and it's far more active and conclusive than just running out the clock. It comes with a crazy scene of the tower falling, shaking the whole ground and almost knocking Artemi off his feet. We get some dramatic music, the music that plays when you discover the panacea. Now that's an ending. Your friends get to stay in the town rather than being banished into exile in the steppe where they will surely die. Your children get to live with you in your father's house. And you may even get a book deal with Yulia Lyuracheva. Everything's working out. The diurnal ending is just correct, and I think we need to retroactively come to understand Artemi's story with that in mind. There are right and wrong choices for Artemi to make. And if we follow his cues and try to understand him outside our own egos, we can see that there is a clear boundary between Artemi Burach and us. In a good portion of his dialogue options and other quest-related decisions he can make, it's often pretty easy to single out the right one in terms of what Artemi would say or do. For example, when you get the key to the old factory building Isidore was using as a laboratory, it comes with a note written by V.O., obviously Vlad Olgimsky, of which there are 2. So you get 2 quest markers on your map. Are you going to talk to Big Vlad, who immediately tried to make it clear that he owns you and wants you to be his quiet family pet doctor? Or are you going to see his son, who seems a bit more enlightened and progressive in his treatment of the kin? Well, if Artemi is actually using his experiences of the town over the past few days, and not just following points on a map, he would probably see Vlad the Younger. There are reasons one may not want to talk to the younger Vlad. Maybe you want to suck up to the more powerful guy to earn some brownie points with the top brass of the town. Maybe there's something in it for you if you let him know that something fishy is going on. But, come on, that's not Artemi. It's been demonstrated to you that Artemi has a temper and isn't a particular fan of the town's industrialization. Several of his touch interactions with items make this very clear. Everyone is always calling him bullheaded, idealistic, and accusing him of acting impulsively. He's extremely direct and has a continuous problem of getting his pride hurt when he isn't respected. You get the picture. You know Artemi doesn't want to simper to the elite who are persecuting his people, whether he feels a deep connection with them or not. So, you go to the younger Vlad. There are tons of constants to help the player get into the right mindset. Times when we see Artemi in the third person behaving in ways we can't control, either in dreams or in the pantomime performances in the theater, or in the cutscene upon his arrival in the town. Like the reflections seen in the homes of several NPCs, these moments are peeks at the motivations underpinning Artemi's actions. They don't exactly tell the player what to do, although I can and will argue that the game tells you its preferred way to play, but these glimpses from the outside give you biographical information about Artemi so that you don't act blindly, without understanding what your options even mean to this guy. I've seen some confusion online about one such pantomime Artemi line. He says, "I'm not sure I know how to love." Of course, Artemi is a friend to all children, most of the townsfolk, and at least one bull, so the idea that he thinks of himself as unable to love seems kind of ridiculous. But it comes to make more sense after Artemi has a conversation with his father, and love takes on the meaning of seeking understanding. To love is to observe and draw connections. Artemi doesn't know how to seek a meaningful understanding of people in the beginning. When he is ambushed at the station, he kills all three of his attackers. And he's immediately chastised for it by a child, who thinks he should have known better. And this child likes killing dogs, so you know he fucked up. When Artemi finally gets to sleep, he dreams of who these three people were, and gains a little more understanding about why they may have attacked him. Maybe doing the right thing isn't as simple as killing the bad guys. If Artemi wants to receive his Uthar from Aspiti, which a player is likely to believe includes some money and other sorely needed items, he needs to come into Isidore's inheritance, including his role within the Katange. So, essentially, anyone interested in the bare-bones survival aspect of this game is going to get the inheritance, even if they initially reject it in the cemetery. If you don't accept it at any point, signified by trying to heal patches, Aspiti will die trying to do your work, and the job of Menku will get thrown into your hands by a morose Odong, who wants you to start giving a shit about the people around you already. The game will have a pretty hands-off approach to player choices, but it really does insist that you come into your inheritance and become a Menku. Once you receive your inheritance, it becomes your job to understand the connections between people and what fates will emerge from those connections. You have to see lines where no one else can, and so choices that expand Artemi's understanding are usually right. Many of Artemi's potential responses are dry, sarcastic jokes, or blatant threats, or defensive reactions to being insulted, but often these responses are discouraged, either by ending a conversation prematurely or triggering something players don't want. Like on day 11, when you can end a conversation with a threat and immediately wind up getting attacked by several criminals in the Broken Heart. Or when you can immediately end a conversation with Daniil when he says your name by just saying, "Yep, that's my name." One option seems to contribute to his purpose, his rightest actions and thoughts, and the others are pretty obviously less righteous versions of him. Don't get me wrong, there are distasteful lines Artemi can say that I quite like. Asking a child if they've ever considered having their tongue removed is funny and right in line with Artemi's personality. Or telling Daniil that he would have absolutely no compunctions about cutting open his guts to get the courier's papers. I'd choose that option most times. Not only do I think Artemi probably would cut him open to retrieve the papers if he needed to, I'm pissed off at Denkovsky, the prickly prick. But consider the alternatives in this scenario. He can rather pompously tell Daniil that he doesn't kill people for mere papers, which truly does not seem in character for Artemi, to be honest. Or he can ask him why he burned the papers. He can try to understand Daniil, make a connection with him. When I direct Artemi to make this cruel comment, I steer him away from his best self. I stop him from being himself. The same applies to actions as well. On the first day, Artemi is asked by Bad Grief to help his colleague piecework by getting a shiv out of his gut. When you get to the house, you find out that piecework got stabbed while killing an innocent woman, for which he and his buddy expressed no remorse, nor any intention to stop killing people. If anyone in this game deserves to get their organs harvested for money, it's these two. But Artemi is a doctor. Sure, he can kill in self-defense, but even using self-defense to an excessive degree gets Artemi chastised within minutes of returning to the town. Again, if I'm paying attention to what Artemi would do and not just following my own whims, I'm not about to kill a person seeking medical attention. There's a weird thing that happens if you start running toward one of the murderers in the town. Instead of charging at you with reckless abandon, they will actually hit the ground in their haste to get away from you. Seriously, you need to be determined as hell to catch up with someone running away from you. Even more so if you have a weapon out, which makes you hilariously slow and clunky. This is bizarre because running away from them is very simple. Just sprint for a few seconds and then walk at a normal pace. But seeing Artemi running at them with a knife out is frightening to them. It's very humanizing and also kind of hilarious. You get a small reputation boost for killing these guys because they are awful, unrepentant murderers making a terrible situation worse. But even this perfectly justifiable violence can have some moral weight behind it. You have the freedom to do what you want, but Artemi can see when he's making a bad choice, when he's being cruel, causing fear, being incurious, or giving up on something he should follow through on. So, our decisions as players are in their greatest alignment with Artemi when he is trying to understand connections, and this idea of connection has quite a lot of nuance. Throughout your playthrough, you come to understand the different ideas competing within the town's ecosystem through its most prominent children. And, as a young adult with no children of his own, Artemi effectively belongs in that category. He's in the same generation as Khan and Capella and Taya. But there is a reluctance on Artemi's part to actually accept the responsibility of being his father's child. Khan is getting ready to take up the cause of his whole family as the sage king of a dream world, not building that world like the generation before him, but inhabiting it. Capella insists that she is taking over for her mother and must therefore become a mother to the town's children, taking them away from Artemi. Taya is little more than a toddler, and she's already the mother superior of the termitary. All the children on Artemi's list are either his contemporaries coming into positions left open by their parents, or they are providing Artemi with the opportunity to do that on behalf of his own father, like in the case of Murky and Sticky. These kids show us that Artemi is coming into his father's role in some way, whether he wants to or not. He arrives a son, but becomes a father. He's reluctant at first, but by the time the children are in danger toward the end of the game, he has unwittingly begun thinking of all of them as his children. But everyone else inherits from their predecessors imperfectly. When they do follow their parents' actions exactly, they often cause needless harm. Grace is hurting herself for the dead, who she claims are becoming Earth anyway. When she gets moved to Peter Stomatin's home, she forms a real, solid relationship with a human being who can actually provide some care for her in return. It turns out they have more in common than you might think. Peter, still in the midst of a substance abuse problem, claims that his next masterpiece will be a giant pit, and Artemi dryly comments that that was the connection between the two all along, because Grace is also concerned with the small pits in the cemetery. Get it? Even though it's a morbid joke, this is an actual line that Artemi connects. Both waste time trying to connect with objects that cannot have a real relationship with them. Peter talks to the tower, but still does not understand it. Grace speaks to the dead, but they don't even talk back, even when they can be heard. Together, they actually kind of work. Grace is extremely attentive to those who she perceives as suffering. And Peter is quirky enough to understand Grace's actions as kind and well-intentioned, rather than just plain weird. I think most people raise their eyebrows at this decision, and yeah, it's fucking weird. Grace became orphaned when her parents succumbed to addiction, and the town put her in the care of its most notorious addict. And then they took her away from Peter and placed her with Katerina Saburova, the second most notorious addict in the town. Personally, my headcanon is that Artemi pulled some strings after the diurnal ending, and Grace winds up living with her new mother, Laura Ravel. But for the time Grace and Peter share together, they develop a really sweet, loving relationship that is just obviously an improvement on what Grace's parents might have expected of her. Capella tries to stick too closely to her mother's position in the town, and it leads her to failure. She wants to take the children from Burach in order to protect them from the army, in the way she imagines her mother would do. But her mother never faced an external threat like the military, and Capella's abilities do not prepare her for the obedient hierarchy of the military. She can do nothing to stop the general from sending the children away. Victoria Ogimskaya the Elder was a kind presence in the town, but it's said that she never engaged in charity, never offered material security. Capella is onto something when she says that there is such a thing as too much care when it comes to children, but she doesn't offer any alternative. She just has this notion that she needs to physically protect the children from general block, which is something an adult doctor is far better equipped to do. Capella fails utterly in her attempt to cultivate the children under her care. Her mother's method isn't compatible with a town that is beginning to find a place in the outside world. In the end, she seems to be getting ready to form a marriage of political expedience with Khan, who represents a force in this town that she despises. The Vlad Zolkimsky want to exercise explicit material power over the town's industry, but the Victorias wield a more subtle kind of power in the same domain. It's a power over people, bodies, while Nina had a far more esoteric power over minds and feelings and dreams. It's difficult to put the pieces we have of Victoria Olgomskaya together in a precise image, but it at least seems somewhat clear that she was more of a politician than a capitalist. Her sensitivity and clairvoyance allowed her to arrange circumstances to achieve her goals. And in this realm, Capella does manage to see some success. Her biggest achievement in the game is arranging her own marriage to Khan, successfully getting the edge over Maria, who now has to rival her sister-in-law and the prospective mother of her nieces and nephews when fighting for power. She further gets the edge over her future husband, who was supposed to be the king of the polyhedron. Victoria plays a small but notable part in Artemi's choice to destroy the polyhedron. She tells Artemi of her vision. She imagines him standing in a pool of blood, which directly relates to the diurnal ending, where the tower is bombarded and Artemi has to wade into the living blood. It's very possible that she saw the nocturnal ending as well, where the polyhedron remains standing, but by presenting the ending where the polyhedron is destroyed, she makes it seem like it's fate, when we just so happen to destroy the thing that she hates with a fiery passion. In the end, she learns how to get the edge over Maria after all, not by straightforwardly telling her rival that she is usurping her role, like she does with Artemi, but by pulling strings and understanding people. Victoria tolerated Nina, but Capella hopes to overtake Maria. Notkin is such an improvement over his predecessor, it's almost embarrassing. He is clearly looking to take up the mantle of bad grief for babies. Same hair color, same leather jacket.
There once was a man of great humor
who found he was dead of a tumor.
If you get killed on the first day, Bad Grief's guys protect you. The first time you pass out from the plague, Notkin's kiddos get you to safety before it can kill you. But most of their similarities serve as a point of contrast. Grief inadvertently sends his men to run around committing murder, while Notkin, probably inadvertently, sends his people to make maps of the plague to help the local doctors save lives. Both are leaders of crews that preach freedom above all else, but Bad Grief is the underbelly stooge for Big Vlad. He's both not free himself, and he participates in keeping the workers on a tight leash. His reflection recounts his talk of how any law is but chains that one must break in order to become free and truly human. And indeed, maturation of the townspeople did come from learning to become disobedient. The plague forced them into a rougher way of life, where the people had to learn to think and act for themselves. But this isn't a romantic kind of freedom. It comes with fear and death and pain and lots of blood. Just about every conversation you have with Grigori shows him in a state of barely contained existential panic at the idea that his rhetoric had consequences. He was free to say whatever bullshit he wanted, but he wasn't free from the bad effects his inartful soapboxing had. That's what freedom is. It demands consequences. One would think that such a person would find the revelation that he's a doll being manipulated by other hands to be a relief, that maybe the violence wasn't his fault. But it completely breaks him. He doesn't want freedom, and he doesn't want captivity. What the hell is gonna make this guy happy? Notkin's crew has a far more sophisticated sense of freedom, and Notkin himself has a far more refined sense of purpose. He has a vision for his followers that he doesn't perpetuate with words, but uses actions to influence. For example, before he assigns Artemi to the task of trying Laika for killing some dogs, He puts Artemi on trial to test that he's the right man for the job. He asks Artemi if killing is wrong, and as he tries to weasel his way out of answering the question, Notkin keeps his mouth shut about what he's really doing. He wants to see if Artemi can be trusted to not kill Laika if he knows what he's done. Notkin will only trust you if you believe that killing is always wrong. But if you tell Notkin that killing can be okay, he won't trust you, which incidentally makes it impossible to get one of the game's few schmouters down the line. Now, one less person is going to survive the plague, which you obviously don't care about anyway because you're a real murdery kind of guy, apparently. Grief, by contrast, has no ability to curate or even understand the company he keeps. He seems to believe that Barley the Barber will just pack up the contraband business if he just asks him to. Why would he? He likes hurting people, and the business is profitable. What was Grief thinking? He's also the blabbermouth of the century. He can't even keep a secret while telling Artemi that he isn't going to betray Reuben by divulging his secret. He has no self-control. He wants to be free from the laws of governments, but he's completely subservient to his own whims. Notkin's freedom is far more fundamental. He wants his town to have freedom from the anti-human ideas of the polyhedron. The Kane's worldview is the opposite of freedom in his mind. Breaking families, like the way Nina used to move children to different parents, turning people into testing subjects, hindering their own ability to make connections and choose lives for themselves. The Kanes view people as larvae that need to be pushed into full humans, rather than as individuals who can find their own sense of self and purpose if simply left alone. Khan shares this line of reasoning with his family, making his subjects wear dog head masks to remind them that they aren't yet humans, but beasts. Notkin has his people adopt animals. Their souls are made of the same stuff, so having a pet makes their souls bigger. It's not a point of shame to be an animal made of simple matter. In fact, there is kindness and warmth to be found in that belief. They care about simplicity to a point where you'd think they'd be more compatible with the Earth cult and the quiet minds of the kin. But Notkin leaves the town during the nocturnal ending, as if his philosophy does require some kind of movement toward individuation. In the diurnal ending, he's the only one in the cluster of Earth cult people that seems happy and hopeful, besides Taya, of course. He sees a future for the old way of being that doesn't require a person to be mindless and unthinking. Artemi is influenced by these children who find ways to build off the knowledge of their predecessors to create something new. Meanwhile, Artemi himself winds up in a situation where everyone around him is telling him to walk the path trodden by his father, or that he has failed or will inevitably fail in adopting his father's work. But we, as players, have no idea who Isidore Burach really was, or if his work is the kind of thing Artemi ought to be championing. And Artemi doesn't seem too sure either. He doesn't want to be boxed in by whatever expectations were applied to his father. My dad didn't hurt anyone yesterday. Tell them to get off me. Even if he did, it wasn't your fault. This gets to the heart of Mark Immortel's work. Artemi is meant to be an actor, picking up the trajectory of Isidore's purpose in order to preserve something vital, to lengthen Isidore's lifespan. Artemi cannot stop seeing examples of children copying adults throughout the town. Dozens of instances of children trying to inherit the exact roles of their parents. But Artemi isn't his father. He's better. Why seek the immortality of Isidore Burach through his son if the son being different is a good thing? So, is Artemi going to follow his father, keeping his influence unnaturally animated to silently rule the town after his death? Or is he going to let his father die and fulfill a different role? The entire game has expectations for Artemi that buck against what the majority of players actually want for him, if I could risk painting with broad strokes. The game keeps telling you that you want vengeance for your father. Drop everything and kill a bunch of looters picking through your dad's stuff. Stop everything you're doing to interrogate the suspects of his murder while you're trying to stop a plague. Claim your father's inheritance. Kill some random guy in a back alley because you found a note in a box written by a child. What are you doing, Artemi? But as a player, you didn't know Isidore, And from what people are saying, he wasn't necessarily a perfect person. He let the whole crude sprawl die. He let the kin get dragged around by the Olginskis without seeming to intervene. He hid behind Oyun's strength. In some ways, he seems to have been quite cowardly. Isidore began to cultivate the group of children on Artemi's list a whole year before calling him home, and presumably by this point, he had made his plans with Simon to unleash the plague on the town. This list of children is your inheritance, creating the impression that Artemi is supposed to protect them. Great, you just got back and your father has saddled you with 7 kids to look after and then died. But learning the meaning of the Adurg symbol changes the meaning of the list. The Adurg refers to the town itself, but it's described in a way that refers to a sacrificial bull. Bulls are compared to the universe in the Khatangi's creation myth. The universe was once filled with a kind of chaos, as most creation myths seem to go, but this chaos wasn't conceptualized as empty space. It was a stifling, homogeneous everything that filled all. Then, Bos Torach, the great bull of creation, walked through the expanse, carving lines as he went. These were the first lines in the universe. Bos Torach created by cutting. By carving paths into the basic matter of existence, he both creates separations and connections. He makes a difference between two things, but a special eye can see how the two were once the same. Bulls marked with the Adurg are meant to be sacrificed in a rite that will restore things to how they were, according to this person Artemi speaks to. Ayargajin cuts the bull along the lines, and the world comes to order. This is another form of inheritance in a way. Bos Torach carves the earth, creating the lines, and then he becomes the earth, to be ritualistically carved through the proxy of supreme bulls. By recreating, the Khatange hope to set things to the presumed correctness of the past. Yet, this kind of thinking is self-defeating. Reenacting creation is a kind of oxymoron. The achievement was made, a paradigm emerged. This ritual doesn't represent a restoration to the old, it signifies the creation of a new thing. Artemi actually performs this rite on day 5. He kills and butchers a bull, and then immediately takes the blood to Denkovsky, bringing him a step closer to the trail of thought that leads to his panacea. Of course he does. Drinking it might help himself, but he wants to advance his knowledge and save everyone around him. He's a doctor. He's not turning things back to how they were before the plague. He's getting a step closer to killing the earth, cutting the umbilical cord. And so, where does that leave the children on Artemi's list? Artemi isn't meant to protect the town in a way that includes its people, but in its capacity to be sacrificed for some supposed return to order. Capella has a self-congratulatory vision of what it means to have been selected for this list. We kids have our own town within the town, a separate one, and we govern it on our own. Isidore believed we were the ones who would remake this town, rebuild and conduct it. This little town incubating inside the old one is going to emerge as a full and independent organism, feeding off the entrails of the dead, this intolerable sacrifice of approximately 15,000 people. Continuous but distinct, a line separating them while denoting where the two were once conjoined. Inheritance does two simultaneous things that seem contradictory. It lengthens a continuity while killing a person. The children on Artemi's list are going to inherit the town, if Simon and Isidore's plans for the future are realized. Isidore ostensibly ends the Chimera town, the one crafted by big, overarching ideas of social organization by the powerful, but does so while cultivating a new group of people crafters that can only take power when the hoi polloi gets cleared away. Isidore is creating continuity between two towns without allowing the town to be put together in a new way. Isidore leaves the final decision in Artemi's hands, but fundamentally misunderstands the decisions that Artemi can make. Isidore says that the town was just put together wrong, so it has to be broken so that it could refuse properly. But he goes on to replicate what he saw as the mistakes of the original town. Disparate elements holding it together by power and ideologies, rather than the people finding their own ability to make themselves. He chooses the leaders, and many of them don't particularly care for each other. This kind of inheritance doesn't actually allow for the older thing to die so that the new thing can live. It sacrifices the body, the thing that exists and experiences the world and feels pain, to keep the form, the thing that isn't working, consistent. Much is made of the idea that a town is the next evolution of a person. A town is a great network of autopoietic forces that generate a kind of synchronicity. But not this town. The town on the Gorkon River was both born out of the earth and artificially carved out to reach the sky. Born to be one simple consciousness, but rewired into a machine that breaks people into fractals. It can't be autopoietic. It didn't evolve, but was fashioned by creators. That's why the town is a chimera. It was never left to evolve naturally. It's like a dog bred too purely that was born with heart problems. The plague does begin to make the town more average, and perhaps more resilient. No longer an idyllic place where even the criminals are softer, the town has become a place of constant danger of violence. Perhaps this was the kind of maturation Isidore and Simon wanted for the town, but they fuck it up. They try to make the town immortal and resilient by preserving this rigid elite to represent the town's future leadership. In doing so, they reveal that they simply can't let go of their control over the town. They seek a kind of immortality of form, but the town's form was changing. It was evolving into a new thing, something that could survive the era it was moving into. It was adapting to modernity, which you can see in the way the kin had to sever themselves from the earth to live in the metal termitary. It was naturally moving into a form that could no longer sustain the wondrous, incomprehensible oneness of the past. The decision to unleash the pest was another conscious act of interference in the town's evolution. I have to say, I think I agree with the changeling on this one. This is one body that doesn't necessarily need to be set like a broken leg. Maybe it's not an unworkable homunculus, but a child that can learn to walk if its parents would stop carrying them around everywhere, or pushing them out of trees hoping they could fly. Artemi never explicitly disagrees with his father, rather seeing himself as a necessary element to completing the actions taken by him. Isidore cuts, Artemi ties. Artemi deals with what his father left behind, not particularly judging him, but allowing himself to understand his vision for the town and fulfill his own role in that vision. He connects the kin of the termitary to the steppe, having been hobbled when they were fused to the bull enterprise. By settling the kin in Shain, they can maintain their identity and hold on to a connection with the earth, even if that connection will be more symbolic in the aftermath of the diurnal ending. But even if Artemi doesn't particularly take issue with Isidore's ideas, and Isidore in turn had no conscious desire to narrow down Artemi's choices, I think I could still say that Artemi has a fundamental disagreement with his father. His father's rigid understanding of what makes for a life, and therefore what must be done to preserve the health of that life, is something Artemi can see just isn't working for him. Artemi looks at people and tries to understand them, not overlooking the larger structure they exist within, but focusing on individuals. The survivors of the termitary are a particularly wretched lot. They try to assert themselves as a viable group that requires its own body to be maintained and bounded outside the Khatange at large, those in the abattoir or living in the town. The people living in the termitary are considered tainted by the kin, but still regarded as animals by the townsfolk. As a homunculus in and of themselves, the plague causes them to experience their own metamorphosis. They want to be one with the earth, but they can't, because they are beginning to experience individuation. They have dissenters, apostates, those who disagree with the group at large, a broken limb. In order to get the kin out of the termitary, Artemi needs to fix the body. Artemi is told by the kin of the Termitary to kill the apostates who disapproved of him and his father, and Oyun tells him that he should listen. Killing them will show that Artemi is able to lead the kin with strength. But Artemi rejects Oyun's advice. Or, at least, he can, and it's heavily hinted at by his thoughts in the mind map that he wants to find another way. He decides that he can persuade the apostates that he is different than his father and won't make the same poor mistakes that Isidore made. And he accomplishes this by asking questions. What are you afraid of? I think it's interesting that in order to avoid killing the apostates, you have to experience the ordeal of Olango, the abattoir. Inside Olango, you have to kill 5 Odong and an herb bride, Nara. But this isn't the same thing as cutting off an undesirable limb, which is how killing the apostates in the Termitary is conceptualized. In fact, you're invited to engage in this violence by your victims. Nara allows you to kill her to help you understand how she will continue to live after death. The Odong don't want to kill you. They attack you because they want you to kill them. In doing this, Artemi comes to understand why they are invulnerable to death. Because they are of a single, simple mind, a mind that can be contiguous with the earth. You take this comprehension, this love, back to the apostates and come to understand what it is they fear. Not physical, individual death, but the death of their culture. Artemi has to understand the many kinds of life that exist in order to refrain from causing harm. He cuts Nara's body in a way that doesn't hurt her, even as he kills her. The kin that live in the Termitary can't survive this kind of death. This would not be a survivable cut. They aren't attached to the earth anymore, as your own heart tells you, and as is demonstrated by the fact that they are in disagreement with each other. They are not of one mind. They are becoming a bit more human, whether they want to or not. Their mind is complex and self-doubting. Even though they all agree that Artemi is a Menku by the end, they obviously disagree on what that means if there were apostates in the first place. Throughout the game, Artemi learns not to fear death, because the most literal definition of what constitutes life isn't very meaningful to him. By killing those who dwell in Olango, and by sparing the apostates and listening to them, he begins to reject Isidore's image for the new town, a utopia run by larger-than-life figures who make decisions for those beneath them. Artemi goes right to the most marginalized person and allows them to participate in the structure of the new town. Artemi becomes more comfortable with death throughout the game. He isn't afraid of killing or risking his life. The curiosity inherent to knowing the lines creates a complex mind, leads to mortality. Artemi allows himself to draw wisdom from all sources, to hold the beliefs of many and consider them in such a way that they can all be true. And he accepts that this complexity leads to death. As the town becomes more complex, the people that keep it in stasis need to be allowed to die. Artemi assists by cutting the kin away from Isidore's influence. Everything that happens to Artemi in the town, and the way he reacts to it, depicts a character that slowly comes to reject immortality. And this is the experience and knowledge Artemi brings with him when choosing an ending. So let's get into these endings. I participated in the video essay video jam this year, and the prompt was journey. I panicked, as I do, and decided to look up the etymology of the word. I was surprised to learn that it comes from the same root as the word diurnal. It's from the Latin dies, meaning day, which went through Old French to take on the meaning of a day's portion, the amount of supplies you would need to take on a day's trek, before winding up in English to refer to a really good game and the band with that one really annoying song. I found this fascinating and immediately thought of Pathologic too. During the diurnal ending, the Haruspex has to walk through the town to have his final conversations with the other living characters, and you feel the loneliness and silence of that walk in a way that you can't throughout the rest of the game. There is no one on the streets, nothing to get distracted by, as the game chastises you for on day one. Incidentally, there are people in the houses, so there are some unnamed survivors. That's kind of good. Shain is empty though, and that's scary. In the nocturnal ending, you're shuffled around from place to place, from conversation to conversation, as though it were a succession of dreams. The word nocturnal comes from the Greek personification of night, Nyx. Nyx is the daughter of chaos, that which does not fall into the ordered nature of the known universe. She is the only parent of Thanatos, death, Hypnos, sleep, and Oneiroi, dreams. We stand an intersex queen. By the way, sleep being the brother of death is something that Mark Immortal actually points out, which I didn't notice until after I wrote this bit, so me and Mark on the same wavelength. The nocturnal ending is a recession of knowledge from the world, to a time when things don't happen for reasons that one can isolate, understand, and predict, but a time where mysterious urges and sensations exist in all matter, and simply need to be heeded rather than studied. Necessary to this is a kind of stasis. To dream is to drift from one wonder to the next. No learning takes place in a dream. That's why dream analysis feels like such a crapshoot. The dreams themselves don't seem to build to any knowledge, even when they grip your heart and make you feel strange things. The world of wonders and miracles is a cradle for humans. The town on the Gorkin River seems to protect its wards, exchanging blood for twire. This paradigm was carried on by the Oneirotex, the alleged builders of the town who recognized the way the land seemed to conspicuously protect its inhabitants, and channeled the wonders of the personified world into their projects. This culminated in the strange, paradoxical philosophy of the Canes, who pose that houses can help people become something more than human, something more than the larvae they normally are. Brilliant. Feed human actualization to the public like a mother bird feeding its young. Makes perfect sense. They make houses to change humans, to make them want new, strange things, without assuming any level of intelligence or intentionality or basic human desires from the people they claim to care about. They built a town where time is created and distributed, but as Artemi points out, they could have built a school. There is a way to view the forced industrialization of the Soviet Union in a similar way, which is obviously relevant because most of the creators of the game would have grown up in the after effects of that industrialization. Unlike most of Western Europe, Russia was incredibly ill-suited to a socialist revolution, at least as prescribed by Marx. Marx was writing about rapidly industrializing nations changing the way industry was done so that workers controlled the means of production. Russia was a largely agrarian country, freshly out of serfdom, having abolished it less than a century prior. So, instead of changing society in such a way that empowered the people living in the society they already had, they chose to create a bunch of industry, forcing resettlement and taking people away from their land, to force them into owning the means of production, using the government as proxy for the people. This bizarre tableau of socialism had nothing to do with the actual purpose of socialism, which is to let the workers make choices about their workplaces. The Canes force people to go through evolutions they proclaim they are ready for, as if their expectations for the people to achieve the much-coveted, mythologized next step is more virtuous than whatever those people can envision for themselves. To make a person want strange new things is to fundamentally change a person against their will. Their philosophy is exposed for bullshit on day 3. You're about to leave the town hall after hearing about the mini-Armageddon that's about to take place in the town, when Georgi Cain blocks your way and won't let you leave. This particular person, I should remind you, knew about the Sandpest beforehand and is complicit in the mass death and suffering that the town is about to experience. So he stops you from getting to work and says, 2 architects live in Earth, Andrei and Peter Stamatin. Both geniuses, each in his own way. Please, take them into your care. You could let the whole town die, but these 2 must survive. Have you ever wanted to punch an old man in the mouth? This whole town that he will claim to care for, that he in fact claims to be one of the keystones of, can die a horrifying and painful death if these two transplants from the capital live. Why? Does he think he failed to properly cultivate the town? Or is the plague fully for the benefit of the Stomatin brothers so that they can single-handedly build the new town across the river? With the patronage of House Cain, of course. This becomes particularly funny when we realize that the polyhedron only stands because the earth in this town is particularly wondrous. Peter isn't a genius, he just exploited a particularly special piece of land while injuring it in the process. Both geniuses my ass, Judge. It's a bizarre moment I can only think is meant to sour Artemi and the player on the intentions of the Cains. They aren't just quirky, there is a real sinister undercurrent to their need to sculpt and manipulate the town. The Crucible is quite a name for their homestead, not only a symbol of sculpting and stretching, but also of inhuman heat. A crucible liquidates iron, takes away the shape it was smelted into, like the people in the town who were systematically made docile and subservient to the whims of their navel-gazing overlords. The polyhedron, beautiful and miraculous though it is, may just be the most ugly ideological chimera in the town. It feeds off the source of wonders that this town generates by virtue of being connected to Olongo, a place which has been carefully and collectively maintained for millennia by the Earth Cult. Perhaps the minds of the kin are truly simple, but they aren't stupid. They hear and observe. They're diligent. They have a fluency with metaphorical thinking that the rest of the town can't keep up with, like how their legends and myths keep bleeding into the town in overly literal and panic-inducing ways. Vladolgimsky the Younger boils down the Udurg symbol to refer to a sacrificial bull, which may be partially correct, but the sigil obviously conveys a far greater concept to the Khatange than it does to their colonizers. As one member of the kin puts it, "Our words are erased. We turn our fathers' flutes into sticks." The polyhedron takes this profundity and explicitly refracts it, taking it away from the earth from which it derives its meaning and breaking it into cells, taking children away from parents so that they can live in their own isolated dream worlds. The simple, collective mind that the town grew from is made multitudinous and infinitesimally small. The polyhedron literally bypasses the town as it burrows beneath the earth, disregarding the people, and its spike reaches into its heart through the abattoir. From there, it feeds on the vital and essential roots of the town with no regard for the pain it feels. The Cains love the potential of this town in its capacity to be warped to fit their narrow-minded ideas of maturation as a species. These ideas include a morbid view of immortality that I find even more bleak than the way the kin conceptualize immortality. A human is a process, a larva trying to emerge from a chrysalis to become something else, and what the kins keep returning to is the idea of stepping over the threshold of death and surviving, like Isidore Bourach does, and Simon Cain very likely accomplishes this as well. Stay tuned for Pathologic 3, I guess. Artemi unmistakably has a moment of sublimity when walking up the stairs of the polyhedron. Nothing happens on his quest, nothing moves forward. All he does is walk for a very long time amongst stars and clouds and strange patterns burning into the air. He thinks, the world is very beautiful indeed. He's moved. But when he descends the pit in Olongo, he sees the spike of the polyhedron pierced into the body of the earth and inching towards its heart. It's not a beautiful, easy experience like climbing the tower. It's dark and frightening. He has to kill 6 people, but through this process he comes to understand the lines. His relationship with himself becomes far deeper as a result. He has a conversation with his own heart, a part of him that understands the kin and the earth, but can't control him in full. He argues against his own knowledge and learns from himself. Artemi learns the way of silent communication. And isn't that a far more effective kind of communication? Sharing a mind rather than trying to trap part of your mind in the boundaries of words? The polyhedron doesn't represent an advancement toward greater understanding and consciousness. It doesn't make humans better or more developed, it really strips humans of the depth of our evolution. The polyhedron claims to cast off the Earth while drinking its life force. It takes the prettiest parts of being a human, the dreams and ideas and joy, and tears it away from the network of human connections that make those things valuable. Let's talk about a concept called mythopoeic thought, first postulated by Henry and Henriette Frankfurt. Yes, Henry and Henriette, it's adorable. This is an hypothesis about the evolution of the human mind that hasn't, and I would argue probably can't, be proven. But the idea has become interwoven into larger ideas about the evolution of intelligence and what it means to have a mind. And while there are holes in it scientifically, it seems to me that Icepick Lodge is consciously evoking it in its depiction of the Chatange. Mythopoeic thought is a possible way early humans might have reasoned through phenomena that didn't involve isolating physical laws. Isaac Newton noticed that the same force that caused the planets to orbit the sun also caused an apple to fall to the ground. He took two separate things and perceived an underlying principle connecting the two. He saw a line. According to the Frankfurts, the ancient human didn't reason this way. Instead of trying to deduce larger general laws that govern the world, they would ascribe intention and consciousness to it. Hence, the word myth. Stories about gods, the personifications of nature, aren't conceptualized as pieces of art, but as a way of discussing how the world actually worked in the mind of a pre-logical person. Why didn't the rain come this year? Probably because the sky was angry, or offended, or hurt. I would argue that this hypothesis poses a dichotomy that doesn't exist. Mythopoeic thought, if it existed, would necessarily involve a kind of logical, modern reasoning. The person who reasons that the sky withholds water due to anger is extrapolating their knowledge of human behavior and applying it to the sky. It's just that the underlying connection doesn't illustrate a physical law, but a common way of feeling that assumes that the sky and a human feel the same emotions and express those emotions in analogous ways. Mythopoeic thought was further extrapolated upon with a hypothesis of the bicameral mind. The idea is that up until the Bronze Age, humans experienced desires and urges and feelings in a part of the brain that they didn't have conscious access to. As such, there was no such thing as a full, actualized, conscious person until the ancient Greeks of Homer's time, for some reason. People with bicameral minds would therefore act without understanding the reasons for their actions. They might attribute them to a daemon or a god. They would act on the same impulses that we imagine animals to act on, since we tend to assume animals don't have particularly complex inner worlds. All those threads of internal experience that make you feel like a complex consciousness in control of your actions would not exist in such a person, because the conscious mind as we understand it is a synchronicity of drives and desires. The Chatange are supposed to resemble the pre-modern mind that sees the world as animated by life, and life in turn is a simple substance that can arrange itself in different ways. The image of liquid iron in a crucible springs to mind, a mass of homogeneous stuff that can be shaped into any form. Their minds are therefore connected, not fortified by conscious ego. There is little need to speak, and the argument of whether or not to use speech rages within the heart of the Chatange. A need to speak, to say the words correct, says one Chatanger, as the burial rites can't be observed for Isidore. Artemi is entreated to abandon speech when his own heart comes to understand what it means to be made of and connected to the earth. The kin who gather at Aspiti's hospice in the evenings, the ones who want to flood the town, begin to ask her questions about how to abandon names, abandon words, abandon their very bodies, confines, borders, egos, names. Speaking narrows possibilities when all of experience can be shared through the earth. Speaking has the paradoxical effect of changing one's expectations of the concepts being discussed rather than describing it. Isidore can't convey the gravity of his intention in language, so he uses a sigil, a dirg, instead. But the sigil invites questions to the townspeople. It doesn't convey a full meaning on its own to Artemi. Artemi feels the need to break it up into words, to recreate it with a form of reasoning that it isn't compatible with. He can't really understand it until he communicates with the heart of the town, without words, as the children of Earth do. Death and words have a relationship in this way of thinking. Words cut meaning as death cuts life. As a Menku, it's the job of Isidore and then Artemi to be able to see connections where the rest of the Khatange cannot. The word love has two meanings in the game, and they are somewhat in conflict with each other. In the mind of Isidore Burach, love is understanding, trying to understand a connection. Aspiti explains the word khara, to see, as to plumb the depths. Love is expressed through connection, a line. But to the rest of the kin, or at least to Nara, this kind of love is conceptualized as a form of separation, born of those with egos. She says, "I would rather live than love." Love implies separation. You love what you are not. You desire what you lack. You seek understanding you don't have. But if you don't separate, you're infinite. You live past your body, because it's not really just your own body after all. You live in the same way a beehive lives when one of its worker drones dies, in the same way that one drone lives on through its hive. The complex can love, the simple can live. Nara isn't all that committed to this dichotomy in the long run. When you dissect her in the abattoir, she claims that the kin love you. But this isn't a love of understanding, it's a love of immersion, integration. Artemi sees the lines in Nara's body and can cut them without hurting her. He understands her, and therefore comes to understand the earth she is directly attached to. The kin believe that they love Artemi because he can see the lines when they can't, that he has a place in their larger body because he was born to the right person. But Artemi doesn't see the lines that way. He isn't simple, his mind isn't quiet. Artemi comes to understand the simplistic nature of an immortal body, such as the kin effectively are, and chooses to turn away from it. Regardless of how the player steers him, he thinks and tries to understand patterns. This is the essence of Earth. When Artemi chooses to kill it, he chooses to allow for a love of understanding and complexity, and reject a love of immersion. Before it dies, the Earth tries desperately to make itself understood. In this process, the polyhedron and the dream culture surrounding it is revealed to be a part of Earth, an extension of its nervous system. The Earth makes itself understood to the player through the sandpest. Artemi hears the voice of Earth speaking to him when he gets infected.
Foeless, foeless, why be foes? Why shun? Better to listen than to fight. Abiding and watchful is wisdom. Let the outlandish life dwell within you, and you will unearth answers. Is this not the task of a healer?
The plague expresses that humankind has strayed too far from the Earth.
Flies, rats, bulls, twire, white skin, earth, great sea, all world. There is more stuff in being than just menfolk. So much more. You're all yourselves. I can bind you, but you come within one another's souls, one from many.
I am the cure for the self. You cleave, I tie.
Humans care about society so much more than they care about life.
Men love a world of men, but life is more than men. Life is manifold, overflowing, flowing from body to body. You call this work illness.
We pretend that we're better and more worthy than microbes, the earth, bulls. But the plague is working its way through the town in order to make it understand that it isn't alone in the world. It further alludes to this overstepping, being born, emerging from a chrysalis. The plague speaks of boldness and overstepping, sharing the language of the Canes.
So many beloved menfolk, so many dreadnoughts, so much to uncover yet, so much to do, teaching healers the gaze, teaching menfolk to see the might and will of kindly earth. Is cleaving the self-same body in twain, not kindly. An open wound is a window into the world. A shout is an arm reaching out from a gaping mouth, tearing a healthy body to shreds with illness is like breaking a nutshell. It hurts men to outgrow their swaddling cloth. It aches to shed old hides. When it runs at the seams, it aches. If you are too weak to bear it, you die. Who can behold the kindliness of ache? Only dreadnoughts, only grown beings, overstepping beings, daring beings, ones with awoken souls, mighty thoughts. They can withstand ache and wisdom. Shall I teach you how to fell me? I'll take 100. Two might withstand me, but those two will be worth hundreds of hundreds.
Again, I think of the Canes and the Utopians. A town is a border-breaking machine, says Georgi Kane, and the polyhedron is the town pressing against a border, trying to step over the boundary, challenging a limit. The plague speaks to people, and we learn in the Marble Nest DLC that some people experience the final stages as a sort of elation. The sandpest makes offers to its victims, to be or not to be.
Your lips crack. Come, take my kiss. There is more aching in birth than in death. It aches to be born. It aches to grow. It aches to choose. There is no ache in death. Shall I kill you?
Some of its victims will choose to die, because to die is to be free of pain, and to be returned to the earth is a genuine kind of happiness. Of course, most victims of the plague aren't happy to be dying. They had their free will taken away. They were murdered. But the plague doesn't care about how humans feel. The sentence, "No one cares how you feel or what you want," is said a few times, particularly by Oyun, who believes that the kin are completely unthinking. The plague, the earth, only cares about bringing the humans back to it, and thereby keeping itself alive. The happiness of death comes from a viewpoint that to be alive is to grow, and growth is painful. People who are not interested in pursuing goals and virtues are fully realized when they are dead. By its own logic, to die from the plague is to be human, but to survive is to be born as something else. Reintegrating with Mother Bodo is that birth. It awakens the human mind to the subhuman world of limitless understanding and life. What the earth wants is to bring its children back into itself, seducing them with the greater potential it offers through immersion. More knowledge, more life. These promises are exemplified by the polyhedron. It's not the antithesis of the earth, but a continuity of it. The polyhedron is said to tear connections, but those who approve of it prefer to say that it refracts instead. This is right in line with the Canes. They're obsessed with the relationship between buildings and people, constructing identical houses with the intention of taking measurements to see how the humans inside change them, and how the buildings change the human souls. These structures manipulate, stretch, and tear the human soul, by their own admission. The The canes themselves tear connections, all toward the end of having an effect on ethereal things like souls. Nina was known for taking children away from their parents and giving them to other families, creating new family units that somehow pleased her more. Victor lost Khan when he became entranced by the polyhedron, and the polyhedron itself tears connections between all children and their families. Capella hates it for that reason. But losing these connections isn't against the will of the Earth. It wants people to forget love and dissolve into the Earth. Remember the story of Bos Taroch. A connection implies a separation. The Earth doesn't want connections, it wants assimilation. Forget boundaries and therefore forget about identities. In doing this, it eliminates death. That is exactly what happens within the polyhedron. I'm unsure if Simon knew that the polyhedron would work by being plunged into the heart of the town, but it seems that his intention for it was to use it to become immortal. It's said that he commissioned the polyhedron to be his focus, to house his soul after death. He leaves behind his body and the context of his existence, maintaining a silent mastery over the minds of the children that occupy the tower. The tower takes away the ability of adults to speak about it, and hypnotizes the children into being dependent on it, feeding them rich optical illusions, essentially turning them into Oculus babies. It's a place where they are safe from the plague, and a place that keeps them children forever, which, being a rose growing out of the blood of Olango, is sort of self-evident. The immortality offered by the polyhedron involves the same kind of spiritual stasis that the Earth offers. Artemi seems to believe that the children learned about the idea of using a nut to create a focus from the polyhedron, which is in and of itself a focus for Simon's soul, probably. When a child enters a facet, they find themselves in their own little chrysalises that keep them entirely safe from death, in foci of their own, essentially. This hinders their ability to understand connections. Artemi can see how things are connected because he is exposed to death. Running for his life on day one brings him to his old friends. Death of his father gives him a greater understanding of Lara's pain. Each time one of his friends, acquaintances, or enemies gets infected or are in danger of being infected, the player has to consider if Artemi's limited resources are worth spending on that person. And they will do this based on Artemi's understanding of who these people are, what their bond is, what Artemi stands to lose if they die. Compassion and love require death. This is to say, the polyhedron is an extension of the Earth that can help us understand the daring, overstepping, mighty of thought vision expressed by the plague. The open wound being a window into the world is both a reference to the breaking bodies of the sick and the dissolution of boundaries between the human being and the Earth, as a person comes to understand that there really is no distinction. Breaking a person down into matter, either by killing them or by teaching them to understand their true, unconscious nature, is actually quite similar to what the polyhedron does. It teaches children to cut themselves into infinitesimally small units, depersonalizing them by turning them into atoms that can't grow because they aren't able to connect. They're dreaming microbes dependent on a larger body that cannot recognize them as people. However, while the Earth and the polyhedron are one entity and represent a single force in the game, this idea of overstepping can be conceptualized in another way, in a way that promotes a diurnal human ending. Georgi is the one Cain that seems to be alright in the diurnal ending. He's happy with it, in a manner of speaking. Victor is losing his damn mind. Khan seems emotionally drained, having lost his whole mission in the town. And Maria, well, she's the same, but that's not a good thing. Georgi, instead, presents a face of solemn but content resolution. He saw the fate for the town that he wanted. Georgi states in a conversation with Artemi, one where he is ostensibly relaying Simon's ideas, that the town has lifted 1 foot over the border of its current limit. The town is a process that has progressed all it can without taking one fearless, definitive step forward into a new reality. Isidore's idea of the plague turning subhumans into humans, creatures who have not yet lived into living creatures, is alluded to in your conversation with Georgi in the diurnal ending. Isidor's analogy of the plague to a vaccination is also referenced. The plague is readying the town for exposure to the new world. According to Georgi, only those whose lives are imbued with meaning and purpose could survive it. Those with bowstrings for souls. This harkens back to imagery from The Void, by the way, which you can learn about in this video. I also think the image was borrowed from Khalil Gibran. For life goes not backwards nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. But anyway, Georgi seems at first to believe that Artemi's decision to destroy the polyhedron was the difficult but right thing to do for the town. It spells an end for the delicate, grown in a greenhouse fragility that it was crafted to have, making it more resilient and independent, and perhaps more spiritually realized, awake and conscious. Yet, Georgi's last line in the game is, "So why does Simon, my dear twin brother, still haunt me in my sleep?" My interpretation of this is that Georgi's conception of this mysterious overstepping must not align with Simon's. Sure, Artemi can make a quip about this haunting actually just being love, but I get the sense that our boy Artemi is more into this love thing than the Canes. No, we have reason to believe that Georgi is being a bit more literal about this haunting. In fact, players familiar with other Pathologic games are a bit more clued into the whole Simon situation than Artemi. I feel pretty confident in assuming that Simon survived his death in some way. Georgi cryptically tells Artemi that Simon won't tell us anything. Not anymore. Not Simon is gone, or Simon can't tell us anything. Simply that he won't. Don't forget that his BFF Isidore Burach somehow survived the trial of death. He isn't alive, but he isn't exactly mortal either. He can speak to Artemi through a dream. In the first game, it's speculated by many characters that the polyhedron houses Simon's soul, and that Georgi is somehow possessed by him in the end. Daniel even gets a chance to chat with him. It seems perfectly natural to me that Simon is somehow present in the lives of his family members and can offer his 2 cents at will. As of the middle of the game, Georgi says that Simon won't tell us anything, but by the diurnal ending, he's haunting him in his sleep. What made Simon act up all of a sudden? I think I know. Simon evidently disagreed with his brother, but neither of them realized that they were in disagreement. Georgi thinks that he is doing the work of his brother by breaking the structure of the town as it exists, or at least agreeing with Artemi that doing so was the right decision. But in reality, Simon was getting ready for the kin to take over, and for the dreamers of the town to move east, into the rising sun of humanity, into an earlier age where they are likely to die. Simon wanted to remain in his cerebral throne in the polyhedron, from which he could exert power over the inheritors of the town forever. The fact that Georgi agrees with Artemi, even though he's a real dick about it, for me feels like an indication that this is the right ending for the game, but the wrong ending for the play. Isidore has a weird comment in his only conversation with Artemi that I can't help but find kind of funny. So, Isidore tells Artemi that the town needed to choose what it wants to be, a working limb of the earth that can operate in a kind of mythopoeic, non-individualized oneness that it was before the Bull Enterprise and the Oneirotex began to cultivate it, or it could break away and become a full, realized identity that can actually grow people, human beings inside. If you respond saying that you prefer the way of individuation and egos and selves, Isidore will explain his plans for the list, your wards who will create the new town. But if you say you'd rather revert back to the past, he's like, whoa now, just hold your horses there, kiddo. It's so silly to me, because while I agree that the game is trying to sway you into choosing the diurnal ending, Isidore has an utterly ridiculous way of planning for the future. If you choose to say that the future is better, Isidore tells you about the town the children will create, saying, those children will build the new town, just like the 3 families and their mistresses built it before, just like Simon and I built it, reaching to the stars. We started it too quickly. We paid for our hastiness. Respectfully, you're a dumbass. It's like we said earlier, Isidore doesn't really have a vision for the town's future, even though the game has him pay lip service to the correct ending here to tip the scale. Like, Does he really think that the amount of time was the problem? If these supposed builders of the town had lived another 500 years, would that have been enough? Or if the polyhedron was put off 10 years? Or the Bull Enterprise was just a mom and pop shop? Would that make this town work? Of course not. The problem isn't the length of time or the ability of the elites to introduce these structures into the lives of the townsfolk gradually. The problem was condescending to control the people's evolution, rather than trusting that they weren't the only people in the world with working minds and goals and values. Artemi is far more interesting and intelligent than his father because his goal in the town is to actually learn from it, not cultivate it like it's his own personal project. Artemi's job is to continue asking questions and thinking, and in doing so, he accepts death. That's what happens in the diurnal ending. We accept that the kin and the Cains have the way of life, while the town of competing thoughts and ideas, enemies and love, accept death. Artemi learned from his grand antagonist, the plague itself. The plague wants to teach Artemi that humans need to grow past what they were in order to become better versions of themselves. And Artemi takes this knowledge and applies it in the way Georgi does. The way to move forward isn't by surrendering to a mindless, unthinking kind of humanity, where the world is revealed to be full of boundless life and no death, but by becoming human and accepting the reality of death in that process. Have y'all played Quarantine yet? There was some annoyance throughout the fandom when Quarantine came out and the complex inventory survival system of Pathologic 2 was simplified to a more straightforward meter, with apathy on one end and mania on the other. It lends itself to less material insecurity, with the right mixture of drugs and other kinds of free stimulation, such as spinning tops and banging trash cans. Daniil Dankovsky doesn't seem to be susceptible to the same level of danger that Artemi Burakh faces in his campaign. You can even take advantage of it. In my playthrough, I maxed out his mania in order to get out of a burnt district without needing to fight anyone. And that seemed to a lot of purists to be working against Pathologic's most mesmerizing feature, its almost insurmountable difficulty. That's part of what makes it so engaging, so vital and important. Having Daniil smoke a cigarette to put some pep in his step isn't the same as having Artemi dive into garbage cans to find some rotten food to shove into his face before he drops dead. Won't that make the game less engaging? Won't that ruin the whole point of the game? I, on the other hand, thought it was excellent, and it made Artemi's run more interesting in hindsight. Artemi needs to be constantly challenged by death, because it needs to be difficult for him to choose mortality, humanity. The needs of his body are constantly whining for immortality, and it would be so easy for him to become immortal. Unlike Daniil, who is millennia behind what seems obvious to the kin. All it would require is forgetting language and slipping back into the earth. But he wants to make new connections, and cut the town off its ties to the earth. He has to go through all the danger and fear and pain that comes from exposure to death, and then choose death anyway. In contrast, The Bachelor is against death. The struggle to stay alive isn't needed in order to convince him that immortality would be lit. His shtick is pro-immortality. Very anti-death, would choose immortality in a heartbeat. Artemi isn't afraid of death, though, and his story is oddly ill-suited to the challenge of Pathologic for that reason. Mark Immortel puts the final linchpin in this story when you die enough times in the game. He realizes that Artemi, and the player, are behaving in a strange way. Rather than following the beats of the play in order to make a character immortal, Artemi is dying over and over again in his mission to do something more important than live forever. He is doing something unexpected. Mark says, "Go, act. From now on, I will watch you with genuine interest. You were clearly doing this on purpose, meaning you must be beginning to understand." When you achieve one of the real endings of the game, Mark expands on the observation he made here. "I was desperate at first. I thought we'd failed utterly. Like the astronomers of old, you know. The eclipse is short and it ends in the blink of an eye, and we missed the chance to observe and calculate everything we needed, and the next opportunity is a century out. This play wasn't the best. A flop, honestly. But it wasn't useless. I see much clearer now, and I know how to improve it. The next show will be better. He realized that you aren't dying over and over because Artemi doesn't care enough to survive, but because he isn't concerned with life and death in the same way Mark is. Mark finds death repulsive, but Artemi sees where it fits into a full human life. I also think that's probably why the Haruspex route was redone first. I suspect it's going to be more hopeful than the Bachelor's route. Quarantine portrays a broken Daniel in the days after managing to leave the doomed town on the Gorkon River. He's being forced to relive the events which he perceives as people fighting him and terrorizing him for doing the right things. The plot has happened, and it has more or less come to disaster. Fate is much more terminal for the Bachelor. But for Artemi, fate is liberating. It's a thing that happens because of your actions. It's something you make and get to craft. The original game makes this comment on the Haruspex's campaign. It's about diverging branches. He was the only one who could attain true freedom. Two diverging pairs of decisions, both predetermined, but the dilemma is a harsh one indeed. That made the freedom all the more salient. Artemi manages to flourish under the constraints of fate. He struggles with the expectations people keep placing on him and is able to prove that his fate is different from what people are prescribing to him. If you think about Artemi's choices as things he considers saying, you can see a person struggling with a wounded ego and indignation. During that final conversation with Georgi in the diurnal ending, the judge says that they managed to find themselves in the best possible result of Simon and Isidore's plan. And Artemi thinks, and not a single word for the person who actually saved them. It's very tempting to chew him out here. This guy was complicit in this horrific act and can't even acknowledge the work you did to clean up his mess. Much of Pathologic 2 challenges you to fight off feelings like this. One moment that jumps out is when you walk in on Capella and Maria having an argument. You have a cool, somewhat distant relationship with Capella, but Maria is a raging asshole. You walk in and interrupt their conversation, and Clara decides to get up in your face and threaten you, should you try to interrupt this very important conversation again. She says that if you try to go in again, you won't be able to speak. It's easy to get butthurt about this, and if you do, you may just go back inside. And lo, you can't speak to them. You feel so powerless because Clara is just this dumb, petty brat. Why does she get to have power over you? Choose who you're able to speak to. And then you take a breath and remember, she didn't stop you from speaking to them. The game itself did. That's how it works. You have a conversation with a character, and when you're done talking to them, you can't talk to them anymore. That's literally how every conversation in any video game ever has worked. Clara isn't an emissary of heaven or a demon with horrific powers. She's a character in a video game that you are pretending to believe is real. Yeah, she clearly has some understanding of the meta level of the game, and she's exploiting that knowledge, but that's all she can do. It's gonna be okay. Artemi gets shit on over and over again, called a coward or a fool for his actions, and he's accused of things he didn't do, including murdering his father by just about everyone, including his oldest friend. Everyone assumes that they know something about Artemi, his intentions, his motivations, and it is getting to him. You can see it in his responses. He wants to lash out and threaten people and insult people, and it's tempting to follow these urges and just be a dick to everyone. When Lara doesn't seem utterly thrilled to see you again, one of the ways Artemi thinks to respond is to scold her for being so cold to him, not being gracious and generous enough with her home. And I kind of get it. He has just arrived in town and he's been attacked, insulted, manipulated, and he's bleeding out. He would probably like a hug right around now. And even Lara, who's the nicest person in his hometown, doesn't seem happy to see him. But those feelings of being snubbed kind of need to be pushed down in order to get through the trials of the Sand Plague effectively. A mirroring situation with Lara happens a little later on. Lara decides that she wants to kill Alexander Block. When you intercept her, you can either steadfastly urge her to give you the gun, or start acting like a gamer and push her for details about her father's death. If you do the latter, Lara will tell Artemi that he's being a self-absorbed jerk. It isn't for him to start inserting himself into her life now that it's come to a moment of crisis. He could have been a loving friend to her, but instead he was running around self-martyring. Every time someone sees a bad side of Artemi, he has a choice about whether to conform to their expectation or to dazzle them by being better than what they expected. And if you make the right choices enough, if you grit your teeth and thank someone for spitting in your face, Artemi will eventually be seen for what he is, completely and consciously free. Artemi's actions play into the hands of other powers. The command to shell the polyhedron is obviously playing into Aglaya's cryptic plans, but the frustration of being her pawn is mitigated by the fact that he's said he doesn't care about that to her face. Artemi feels free. I feel unambiguously certain that saving the town, even at the expense of miracles, is the right decision for him. And I don't feel like a player manipulating Artemi. I feel like I've helped him achieve the decision he wants. And doesn't that mean that he is the one in control? Who really speaks to Mark Immortel after that final decision? The two of us speak of Artemi Burach as if he is dead or as if he didn't exist. But we can see a distinct Artemi Burach beneath our decisions, often fighting against our decisions, fighting against our own will to make the fate he wants. He isn't in that theater having this conversation with Mark. We explicitly talk about him. Are we back? Mark asks us, as if we'd stopped being ourselves when playing Artemi. We can end the conversation by saying that we don't want to remove the mask, that we may want to be Artemi forever, but Artemi can't be worn like a costume. He can't be controlled, not by an entity, and not by a horde of unthinking cells in a body exactly like him. Pathologic 2 is a weirdly heartwarming gaming experience. It's grueling and upsetting and blah blah blah. Every grim thing you've heard about the experience is true, but those trappings are necessary to create what I think of as a profoundly optimistic story. A story that really does make death feel like a small gap in the road. It makes fate feel like freedom, and it makes reality feel far more profound than dreams. And it achieves this by giving Artemi the ability to genuinely change the characters around him. Even Mark Immortel, ostensibly the main figure that can peek behind the curtain and see the artifice of the game, seems like he has had his expectations turned around by Artemi. Artemi Burach is a person that cannot be controlled by the hands of a higher power because he acts on his own internal sense of right and wrong. If another being is counting on him making those decisions, or even controls his internal sense of right and wrong, he is still free, because he is doing what he thinks is right. He is clear-headed and focused on his heart. And despite being okay with this, because of this, he is able to go off script, to disobey his destiny, and be truly free.